Development Manager, and I'm here on Zoom with Alison Cable, who is our Tri-City staffer, and we are going to be doing the first of our many dispatches from work around the state. So maybe, Alison, you can start with just a little bit of information about you and your background and how long you've been with Futurewise.
Okay. Hi, Kate. Hi, everyone. Thank you for setting this up. So I have a passion for citizen engagement and for sustainability. And I've been working for Futurewise for about 2 years now in the Tri-Cities. And I grew up here and worked mostly for local governments and nonprofit organizations doing fundraising. So the Tri-Cities is in southeastern Washington State, and it consists of Richland, Pasco, and Kennewick, and also West Richland. So some people call us the Quad Cities, because we want to make sure we give a shout out to West Richland. And one of my first jobs out of college was for the city of West Richland, actually. I was the deputy city clerk. And I attended city council meetings and took minutes and was responsible for a lot of the requests for public information. And so I really learned that how important it was to have transparency and access to information on all community decision making. So my husband, I have 2 boys, 12 and 15.
And you're doing a very good job, you were telling me, of self-isolating even from them for this conversation because everyone is at home.
Yeah, that's been an adjustment. They're not in school right now. So, and my husband's working from home as well. He works for one of the major employers here in the Tri-Cities, and he's a lawyer. So we're trying to find our workspaces and shuffle around a little bit, but it's going pretty well so far. So. So we went to Portland, actually. We moved to Portland for my husband to get his law degree. And then I decided that I wanted to get a master's degree in public administration. So I went to Portland State University, and we lived in Portland for, I think I said 17 years. And I worked for the regional government and oversaw a business sustainability program there. And that was based largely on like social marketing principles and strategies to reduce waste, conserve resources. And then we moved back to the Tri-Cities about 7 years ago to be closer to family. We went to Washington State University, but we didn't meet right. We had a lot of the same friends, but we didn't meet right away. So yeah, I mean, technically we're still living here when we met, but kind of a funny story. So
yeah. It's kind of funny. So since you've been back in the Tri-Cities for Futurewise, what have been kind of the priority projects you've been working on?
So our funding for our program here is primarily from a grant from Columbia Riverkeeper.
Right.
And a lot of people don't necessarily understand the connection between water quality and land use. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of issues with, sprawl and the more impervious surfaces that you have, the more runoff, the more opportunities for, pollution, and the more issues that you have with urbanization. There's a lot of money that goes into, construction of moving water out of built areas. And I think because we are at the confluence of the Yakima River and the Columbia River, and we only get 7 inches of rain a year, I think sometimes people think, oh, well, we don't get very much water runoff here, so it's not much of an issue. But 1 inch of rain equals on the ground is about 27,000 gallons of water, a little more than 27,000 gallons of water. So
okay, that's not nothing.
Yeah, so 1 inch on 1 acre is like fills a large size swimming pool.
Right.
So that all has to be managed and contained anytime the water doesn't have a natural ability to go into the ground. So off of any impervious surfaces, roofs and roads and things like that. So
parking lots.
Parking lots, yes. And we are one of the fastest growing regions in the state. It's the 3rd largest metro area. Our major economic activities here are agriculture, manufacturing, research and development, and then remediation of nuclear waste, and some tourism. So we're growing really quickly relative to the rest of the state. We have affordable housing and fairly stable unemployment. I think, or fairly stable employment, sorry. I think that because of one of our primary industries being, agriculture, and then also the Hanford cleanup is here. So I don't know if people are really familiar with that, but we're the largest cleanup in the nation of
Wow.
Produced plutonium. So it's the largest in U.S. history. We also have the B reactor, which is a national monument here. And so, yeah, so a lot of our major industry has kind of been insulated from some of the other economic downturns in the country.
Right. Because you can't just stop cleaning up plutonium.
No.
Still there.
No, you can't. You can't.
So in terms of our project, so you talked about,
sorry,
we're working to concentrate.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, so when I first started here a couple of years ago, I really wanted to add capacity to any existing efforts around like stormwater pollution prevention education. And we have some program elements that do that. And then we also have a grant right now in partnership with Mid-Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group for a riparian restoration project in Chiawana Park in Pasco. So that's underway. We're needing to make some adjustments right now to all of these projects, obviously, but I just want to name a few.
Yeah, well, we can go through, all of the work we were signed up to do as of, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and then we can talk a little bit about the contingency planning.
Right. So in addition to that, I think our bread and butter work, for Futurewise, obviously with the implementation of the Growth Management Act, or comprehensive plans, commenting on comprehensive plans and urban growth area expansions. And so right now, the city of Pasco is working on their comprehensive plan update and also a expansion of their UGA. So that's underway. The city of Richland is working on a connectivity study. So we're, working on encouraging just walkability and active transportation related to that study. And I can tell you a little bit more about that too. And I'm also the treasurer for the Alliance for a Livable and Sustainable Community. And that's an alliance of many organizations in our region that are trying to promote just different aspects of sustainability. So yeah, still doing all of those things with some adjustments.
That's just fine.
Yeah, so the growth pattern in the Tri-Cities is very spread out. We have a lot of primarily single family homes. Alex Brennan, our executive director, and you, Kate, came out last fall, and we had a meet and greet with some of our friends here in the Tri-Cities, and we took Alex on and you on a tour of the area, and he was really, one of the things that struck him, he told me, was these what they call alphabet homes in Richland. So there was a lot of plutonium that was produced in the 1940s through the 1980s in this region, which is why there's a cleanup now. But there were some small towns here, but in the 40s, when they started building these, the plutonium production started to really ramp up, the government actually built housing for the workers. And you can go on tours and see the houses and see the different, floor plans. And one of the really interesting things is that there's a real grid pattern to the neighborhoods and some community parks, and just a mixture of large houses and small houses, and duplex and multifamily and single family. So it's kind of unique, this like older parts of Richland, the way that it built up, and you can still see that. So
yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting too to kind of have these examples of housing structures that are very akin to, what we advocate for now in our cities, which is, different styles of houses and different sizes of houses and apartments and townhouses and duplexes, like the idea that lots of different people with different backgrounds and different incomes should all, be able to live in the same neighborhood. So it was very cool when we were in Richland to see this older example of that kind of style of development, pretty close to the downtown. And then it was definitely in stark contrast to when you took us out to some of these newer developments, kind of way out on the edge of town that were not, it's a lot of, big houses with big driveways and garages, and, they're not super close to, amenities, or definitely not anywhere you have to kind of drive everywhere. So it was definitely very cool to see that, Richland had in its history some really good planning practices that, we're certainly hoping to see emulated, not just in the Tri-Cities, but in other places across the state.
Yeah, for sure. And there are more development patterns in more recent years that are much like a suburb that you would see for a larger city, a lot more spread out, a lot, larger retail, a lot of single story, housing and even commercial spaces like strip malls and
Right.
and shopping, areas. So yeah, it is interesting to see the contrast with kind of the original growth patterns in the core of Richland and their sort of downtown area. So yeah, so there are also some examples, like, for instance, the Port of Kennewick is working on a project called the Vista Field redevelopment.
Hmm.
And there's an old airfield in Kennewick that they're trying to repurpose, some of the asphalt and the pavement, and use that area that's, available space and for infill, and
Hmm.
have it be more of a mixed use,
Hmm.
commercial and residential, so people can, live, work, and play, and something that will promote active transportation versus having to get in your car and drive,
Right.
to amenities. So so that
And
will
we
be
saw that on
pretty.
our tour too, I remember.
Yeah, that. And then in Pasco, there's a Broadmoor community in Pasco that's a similarly planned development, just wanting more bikeable and walkable neighborhoods. So we're excited about that. Yeah, and trying to contain growth in general to preserve farmlands, to our to within our urban growth areas. And we also have partnered, like I mentioned, we wanted to add capacity to existing efforts. So the conservation districts do a lot of classroom education, and
Hmm.
they have what's called an enviroscape. And it's
Oh.
a really neat model that you put, you spray water on, and you have materials that are supposed to represent like what you might see on impervious surfaces,
Hmm.
that would result in runoff versus filtering into the groundwater through the ground, and like oil and dog poop. The kids get a kick out of that.
I'm sure that's like very exciting for them.
Yeah.
But that's a
So we
really
used
cool
to.
example. I mean, and what an awesome way to teach kids around, like the value of kind of development and planning that really integrates natural resources and natural development as a way to manage um, runoff, and definitely kind of talks to the value of, what we, again, like Futurewise, our bread and butter, like how do we concentrate growth in specific places so that we can protect our natural areas and our farmlands outside of those.
Yeah, so one event that I do is called a Wildlands Walk with Taptail Greenway Association, and they have it's an urban, like a greenway, and it has a wetland that they're working to protect called Amon Creek. And so there's walking paths, and they do a lot of educational programs. And so I take the Enviroscape and I set it up right next to this creek where there's a lot of irrigation runoff and stormwater runoff. And so it's a really good visual of, like, anything that's collecting on the pavement, any pollutants are, kind of need to go somewhere. And the wetlands are so, valuable, important not only to wildlife, but also they act as a sponge and help
Hmm.
filter out some of the, the pollution
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
runs off of those surfaces. So it's super fun. The kids like, I have these spray bottles to put water on it, and the kids like to spray water onto it. So
And maybe each other, probably, I'm guessing.
a little bit, yeah. Yep, you might want to stand back for that. So yeah, I mean, it is sad because this year, some of the events, the community events that were planned around resource conservation and giving us an opportunity to educate the public about these things are not going to happen this year. There's a lot of things that go on in the spring, particularly around Earth Day. We have a celebration of science and the Wildlands Walk, and there's a huge event that the Conservation District puts on that's called the Salmon Summit. And all of the fourth graders pretty much in our region release a smolt into the river, and then they spend a day down at Columbia Park learning all about salmon and
Oh, that's so cool.
and yeah, different aspects of wildlife and our ecosystem. And so it's sad it's canceled this year. Both of my kids went to it, and it's a really great event. We were planning to participate in that, and so so I don't think that that's going to be rescheduled. There may be some other events that are rescheduled, or of course, next year when the kids get back to school, we can take our education programs back into the classrooms as well. So
yeah, well, that's kind of a nice transition. I mean, we're all kind of in this new reality, and we're still adapting, and our partners are adapting, and our local governments are adapting. So I don't think we necessarily have such a clear picture necessarily about what our work is exactly going to look like over the next couple months, or perhaps even longer. But just in terms of what you're seeing right now, like how how is having the government moving to tele meetings working? How does that impact our appeals? And obviously a big thing, like you brought up, your personal passion is community engagement and making sure people know what's going on. So how is that being impacted by the fact that a lot of our traditional channels where we might be doing education or outreach are not available to us?
Yeah, it's definitely impacted. So local governments are adjusting to the distancing requirements, and there was a proclamation Governor Inslee issued, which puts a ban really on public meetings, and so the cities are still obviously functioning. Most of their agenda is focused on what is the essential operations of the business of the cities, and then anything that's related to the coronavirus, anything that's sort of critical that's related to that. And so the agendas are a little bit more limited. We are still, there was a planning commission for the city of Pasco meeting that happened on the 19th of March, and I would normally, I was planning to go,
Right.
and I was planning to, represent not just Futurewise, but talk a lot about what I have worked on with our partners in the community for the last couple of years around smart growth and these values that are really coming from our community and coming from Pasco residents and people in the Tri-Cities who want to see less sprawl, less use of cars,
right,
less more accessible amenities, proximity to amenities. And Pasco is doing some wonderful things with trying to remove barriers for redevelopment and infill, and reduce the size of their UGA expansion in order to preserve farmlands, and maximize their resources and their finances for the way that their city functions. So it's wonderful that they're doing that, and we want to support that as much as possible. So not being able to show up in person and have a name and a face to these ideals with growth management and sustainable land use, and represent some of our partners and take some folks from the community and encourage them to participate as well. It's different in writing versus seeing it in person. So
right, but it sounds like you did submit written comment. I mean, that is an option. It's a less ideal option, but we can still do it.
yeah, we can still do it. And I a lot of these meetings were already being recorded, and there's webcast of the meetings. And so it's great because you can still stay informed and follow, but it just slowed everything down
Yeah.
and created some new barriers for us. So
Yeah.
yeah, so we're adjusting as the cities adjust, and we're
Yep.
going to continue to do what we can. And yeah, so the other thing that we were really excited about was a possible Spanish language program around active transportation, and
Yeah.
looking at ways that we could get people who, the Spanish speaking community. We have a large portion of the population in Pasco. They're, that their primary language is not English. And so it would be great if we could present some information around active transportation and empower them in, community participation and engagement. And
Right.
we had some resources that we wanted to put towards that. And we're looking at ways we can adjust. And I don't know if it particularly lends itself to doing a presentation like this or not. So we're going to look into that some more and make some adjustments there. So yeah, don't have all the answers yet, but we don't want
No,
to
absolutely.
stop. Yeah, we obviously don't want to, stop, but then
Yeah.
also honor everyone's, also what everyone else is going through with figuring this out, and kind of
Right.
what our working conditions are, and new working conditions are going to be for a while. So
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that seems like a good place to wrap up. Allison, thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna end our recording. Do you have any other final things you want to share?
I just want to say thank you for doing this, and thank you for watching and listening. And I'll put some links for some of the things that I mentioned, some of the projects, and the historical kind of iconic sites in our community that people can find out more information about if they're interested.
That sounds great. Thank you, Allison.
Thanks, Kate. Bye-bye.